What's up everybody, Demon back, and welcome to a brand new video. This one is going to be doing my Walking Dead Sing Me a Song breakdown. Now, yes, this is a week late, and I do apologize for that, but there is an explanation. My computer up and killed itself over the weekend, so I just got it fixed, and now I'm going to break down this week-old episode, and we'll talk about some things you may have still missed. We'll as well talk about some things that wound up foreshadowing future events, because, well, there was a lot of it in this episode, and let's get into it. Now, this episode is pretty much pulled straight from issues 104 through about 107 of the Walking Dead comics. I mean, it is almost word for word at certain parts, so that is really cool for comic fans to see Carl's greatest storyline brought on screen. Now, I'm going to be breaking down this episode by story. Now, I know this episode is told in a non-linear fashion, jumping back and forth between story and story, but I think it works better if we talk about each story individually. So in this episode, we see Michonne walking across the street here. She whistles, and two walkers come up behind her. Now, pay attention to the framing here, because the way the walkers are framed behind her is just like the way she had walkers back in seasons 2 and 3 with the two walkers she had on a chain. Now, she captures this redhead woman who winds up being one of the saviors. She says, "Take me to Negan," and we see the rest of that play out next episode. Now we jump into Rick's storyline with Aaron. Rick and Aaron wake up in this truck. They go out, they're scavenging for Negan, they're looking for supplies. Pay attention to the walkie-talkie that Rick has is the same walkie-talkie that we see in Michonne's bag, which could be a reference to Glenn's walkie-talkie from last season with the "Good luck dumbass" line, which could also be a reference to the walkie-talkie from season 1. Rick and Aaron stumble upon this little old farmhouse pretty much, and they see this big sign which has a lot of messages on it. Now the messages basically say, "I've got lots of stuff." It's a list off of supplies this person has, followed up by basically a death threat, and Aaron reads it out for Rick, and then they find the place where he was protected. Now, supposedly at this point, he is dead. We don't know if that is 100% true or not, because it's not ever confirmed in the episode or next episode, but we do know that for the moment he is not around. Now jumping into Spencer's story as well as Rosita's story. Now at this point he makes the interesting comparison that paying up to Negan is just like paying taxes, which is a pretty good real world analogy. I mean, you have to pay your due to earn your keep. That is essentially what they have to do with Negan. Negan just enforces it in a very different way. Now he also says, "I didn't do this, Rick did." We see later in this episode that he really hates Rick. Right here is the follow-up of that conversation with him and Gabriel taking a car trying to find supplies. He does say, "I hate Rick. He was a cop. Fine, he shouldn't be in charge. My mother served Congress. She led people. She brought people together. I should be the leader," pretty much. That's what he's saying. Now he says, Rick showed up. My family died. Gabriel basically says, "Stop the car. What you're saying is wrong. You're not right. Everything you're saying is wrong. I was in your position once. It's alright. You can come back from this. You're not too far gone." Now Spencer finds this weird walker in the woods here. After Gabriel leaves him all alone, Spencer finds this walker, this presumably hunter, who tied himself to a tree. Now this is a hunting stand. People do this in the real world. But this guy appears to have been ripped open from the stomach, so some sort of animal could have gotten to him, or maybe a walker got him when he was on the ground. He just climbed up the tree and died up there. Who knows what happened, but Spencer knocks the guy down off his post, he rips his arms, and he falls to the ground dying. Cool thing about this walker, if you pay attention, his guts are cut out and open. Now this is foreshadowing events that happen next episode. Now jumping into Rosita's story. Now Rosita and Eugene visit the same warehouse that Abraham and Eugene visited last season. Rosita convinces Eugene to make some bullets. Now she does so in a very harshful way by basically calling him out, tearing him down the same kind of way Abraham did to Eugene in that same warehouse. Now jumping into the main story of the episode, the good story of the episode, in my opinion. This one is where all the interesting and comic book stuff happen. Now we have this cool little interaction between two saviors in the car, and then they start driving away. It is revealed that Carl and Jesus are still in that truck. Now pay attention to the last line that a savior says this little scene, and the last line he says is "Thank Christ," followed up by the person named Jesus coming out of the truck, which is a pretty funny kind of comparison here. Now this is pretty cool for Jesus for a couple of reasons. Number one, we see him laying a trap for the saviors and cutting the box of booze open at the bottom, so when they pick it up it'll all spill out that Gregory left them. He also sees some sort of weird religious statue outside paralleling his persona as a religious figure as Jesus. He pours some syrup outside of the truck, making a trail, just showing how smart he is, before he dives out of the truck, performing some pretty cool ninja moves, and then he sees Carl wave goodbye to him. This is pulled directly from the Walking Dead comics. Now Carl finds some guns in the truck. When people go into the truck, they notice something happens when all the bottles spill, and then they look up and see little Carl sitting in the back of the truck with a machine gun. Now he starts gunning one of them down. He gets out of the truck, stay back, drop your weapons. This is pulled directly from the Walking Dead comics, straight down to the conversation you can overhear Negan having with presumably Dwight. One of the coolest issues of the comics for Carl fans. This is really what made Carl such a great character. Now in the Walking Dead comics, it is important to note that Carl does gun down both of the people in the truck straight away, followed up by more in a couple seconds. In the show, Carl gets out of the truck and says, "I only want Negan. He killed my friends." This is cool because in the Walking Dead comics, he has the same line, "He killed my friend." And it is really cool to think about the fact that in the show and in the comic, Carl and Glenn had such little screen time together that it is cool to hear Carl referring to Glenn as his friend, showing that there was still interactions they had. We just never saw them on screen. Now Carl says no one else needs to die, showing that he still has humanity left, so he's not going to gun down all these people who are presumably innocent. And then Negan comes out and says, "You are adorable. Did you pick that gun because it looked cool?" You totally did, right? Now Negan says, "Kid, I ain't gonna lie, you scare me." Pretty funny. And then one of the saviors makes a move at Carl. Carl guns him down before Dwight tackles him. Daryl's watching in the background. Negan says, "Is that any way to treat our new guests?" All of this is pulled directly from the Walking Dead comics, except, like I said, Carl does gun down quite a bit more people. It is revealed later in that same issue, Carl got at least 6 or 7 of Negan's men right here. Now, I really like this big reveal of the Sanctuary because they put so much detail into it, making it comic accurate. I mean, not only does the factory look like it was pulled directly off the pages of the Walking Dead comic, but you also have the heads on spikes, the walkers on chains, the walkers on pikes. You have the walker being strung up with his arms and no torso, which is a great panel from the Walking Dead comics, pretty much pulled straight from. You can see the heads also, so that's pretty cool. There was some promo images of Walking Dead that came out earlier for this season that had some heads on pikes. People were presuming maybe it's the Whisperers. Assuming no, that it's not. It was in the comic book, so yes, here it is in the Sanctuary in the show. But no, the Whisperers did have a cool decapitation moment and put heads on pikes, but I don't think that is this. I don't think that's what this is referencing. Now, like I said, you guys can see also here that there is that walker with only his torso left over here in the right hand side of the screen in the comic panel strip of the walkers. Negan makes a joke about Carl's one eye and how much his stink eye isn't as good as Rick's because he only has the one eye. Now, there's also an interesting line here where he says Daryl's job would be really hard if he had one arm. This whole idea of one arm keeps being referenced with Negan, which is probably a reference to the comic book moment when the governor cuts off Rick's hand. This is really cool for comic fans because that is teasing the possibility that either Rick or Daryl or some other major character in the show is going to lose a hand later in the season. Now, Negan does make the reference in the first episode, I'll make you cut pieces off of Daryl. So maybe Rick will have to cut Daryl's hand off, or maybe Carl will have to cut Rick's hand off as a play on the comic book moment. That could be a really cool way to get Rick to lose his hand. Negan says he's going to take Carl inside. They're going to be buddy-buddy, but he's not going to have any time to screw any of his wives today. And then he says maybe one. We see Dwight staring at him all angry. You can see by the expression on his face that he is angry at Negan. He has hate towards Negan. That comes up later in the episode as well. Now we have another great comic book moment here where Negan is telling Carl, "You're not scared of anything, don't be scared of me, you're pretty cool." That's pretty much what he's saying. That's the gist of it, so it's really cool to see brought into the show. Here's the comic book moment for those of you who are wondering. Negan walks inside and everyone living in the sanctuary bows to him. He says, "You see that? Respect." Once again, straight from the books. Now when they go into Negan's room, you see all of Negan's wives. Negan makes the joke to Carl, "Every woman where you're from, dresses like they do the books at an auto shop." He says you're going to want to look at their titties, so he's just messing around with Carl. I do think this is a funny joke, although I don't think it lands as good as the comic joke, which is much funnier in my opinion when he says they all dress like lesbians. Now Negan asks Sherry what happened between Amber and Mark. Sherry makes the comment that what we talk about when you're not here is none of your business. That comes up right after this scene here with Negan again. Negan basically says, "I know they went and banged." Sherry says she made a mistake. Negan says, "Calm down, have I ever hit one of you?" Sherry says no. Negan gives Carl a beer, which is fun, and then he goes over and talks to Amber and says, you don't have to be here if you don't want to. In fact, I don't want you here if you don't want to be here. And he says, you can't cheat on me if you're going to stay. It's all going to work out aces for you. That's a line of his, which could be a reference to Abraham from last season, saying everything is aces again when he's driving the herd back in, I believe, episode 1 last season. We also see Dwight here between the Negan kiss with Sherry. He is looking angry at Negan. Like I said, this comes up multiple times in the episode, and here's one of them. I think Dwight is going to eventually rebel against Negan. Daryl says, why you got him here? Negan says, what we talk about when you're not here is none of your business, bringing up that Sherry line again. Then he says, don't make me put this toothpick through his one good eye, which is pretty screwed up. Daryl and Sherry share a look here, which is interesting. I wonder how that's going to play out later in the season, this little relationship that these two have. Pretty much all this interaction with Negan and Amber, though, did come from straight from the Walking Dead comics, as well as Negan leaving with Carl here. When they get into their new room, Negan pretty much says how impressed he is with Carl and how he's really proud of Carl for basically not just sitting around and moping, and in fact coming out and killing Negan's men. He says, I'm not going to let that slide. We do see later he does let that slide for the most part. He's not going to hold it against Carl because he does pretty much like him. Now he also says he's got to take off his eye bandage, though. That is one of the things. Carl had to show Negan his eye. This part's all straight from the comics as well. Carl starts crying. Now Negan gets real with Carl for a minute. He breaks down this intimidating wall, gives Carl a little bit of a sense of the real Negan. Carl and Negan have an interesting relationship in the Walking Dead comic book that they're already developing in the show here. Now, Negan and Carl do eventually have what I would consider to be a semi-friendship, so this is a cool way to start it, just like from the comics. Now, Negan says he forgets, it's easy to forget Carl's just a kid, he didn't mean to hurt his feelings or anything. This is also from the comics, but it's also interesting because it could be a reference to Negan's pre-apocalypse occupation, which is just now being fleshed out in the Walking Dead comic series, with him being a high school gym teacher, which is interesting. Now, Fat Joseph comes up into the room, handing Negan Lucille. Negan makes some jokes about Lucille, which makes Fat Joseph all uncomfortable, and then he basically kicks him out. This is straight from the comic books also, with the person showing up, giving Negan Lucille, Negan making some jokes about Lucille, freaking the person out, and then kicking them out. Here we get the song title dropped into the episode, I Want You to Sing Me a Song. Carl sings him You Are My Sunshine as Negan swings around Lucille, practicing bashing in heads. Once again, I'm getting sick of saying it, and I'm sure you guys are getting sick of hearing it, but this is straight from the comic books. I mean, it is really cool to see just how faithful they were when adapting this. Then Negan asks Carl, what about your mother? Where is she? Did she sing that to you? Carl says, I shot her. And then Negan says, no wonder, little future serial killer. I'm not even going to say it this time. Now Negan goes downstairs, gets the iron. This is the iron that punishes people. This is Negan's title card. We see this furnace on fire with the iron in it, as well as Lucille by the fire. The rules keep us alive is a line that shows up in both the comics and the show, which is an important factor of the life at the sanctuary. Negan grabs the iron, presses it up against Mark's face. When he pulls it away, Mark's pizza face peels off onto the iron after being singed away. This happens in the comics. Mark gets burnt up, although it does look a little bit more gruesome in the comics with it bubbling and everything afterward, which is pretty messed up. Dwight having to sit there and watch as it happens. Negan tells Carl, you probably think I'm a lunatic, kind of joking around. They go away. Now Dwight and Sherry have a little interaction in the stairwell again, although this one's a lot more one-sided. Dwight says, don't beat yourself up. Sherry tells him, we made a deal. We're doing this for us. Only supposed to affect us. It's affecting other people. This is screwed up. Dwight says, if you're still standing, it's on someone else's back, and Sherry doesn't take it well. She just kind of leaves him. Now Negan tells Carl he thinks his eye is cool before asking him, what should I do? Carl says, I think you should jump out the window, save me the trouble of killing you. Negan's all impressed of Carl again. Now Carl says, I think you're not doing anything. I think you're not saying what you're going to do to me because you're not going to do anything. And Negan says, maybe you're right. Don't even have to say it anymore, you guys get the point. Now, as the trucks are driving away, because Negan does decide to take Carl back to Alexandria, we see this cool little thing right here where we see Jesus on top of the moving truck that they are taking to Alexandria. Why is this cool? Because he did that last season to Rick and Daryl. Somehow he got on top of that moving truck and sat on the roof until they noticed him. There's this little interaction with Negan and Daryl here. Daryl saying, don't do anything to the kid. And Negan putting Daryl into timeout into his little box again, which is funny, before flipping him off. Daryl looks up and sees Jesus getting off the truck. Now, once again, a parallel to the episode from last season with Negan flipping Daryl off the same way Daryl flipped Jesus off. Now we see Jesus got off the truck. Daryl looks behind him. Someone slips a note under the door when he's in his box. This is revealed to be Jesus next episode, with the key attached to it saying "Go now." Back at Alexandria, Negan arrives, and Carl and Negan go into Rick's house. Olivia is there watching Judith, so there's some jokes thrown at Olivia's weight again. She turns around, slaps him. Negan says he's 50% more into her. Now Negan goes on a little tour of Rick's house, touring the water, the hot water, and the carpet, playing a game of darts. He is loving it there before he finds baby Judith. Rosita, Eugene, and Spencer all arrive back at Alexandria. Eugene is mad at Rosita for being so cruel to him back at the factory, and Eugene is impressed by Spencer finding so many supplies to give to the Saviors. Negan actually treats Judith really well. He does seem to really care for this baby girl. He really likes her, and maybe that is once again a reference to his previous life, him being a husband as well as a school teacher. I'm sure he can relate to kids very well, which explains his relationship with Carl and this little interaction with Judith where he really, really likes her. He says, maybe I should kill you and your dad both. He tells that to Carl, which is pretty screwed up because he's implying that he'll kill Carl, live in their house, and raise Judith on his own. So that's a little bit messed up, but what are you going to do? Now, overall, this was a really good episode, really good for comic fans for obvious reasons. I'm going to give this one a good 8 out of 10. What a good episode. I really liked it. I hope I pointed out some things you didn't notice before. This was mostly just me pointing out how many comic book references there were in this episode and how many direct pages were stripped from the comic books, placed into the show. And I will be seeing you guys tomorrow for the next breakdown of the mid-season finale for The Walking Dead, titled Heart Still Beating. That is a great episode, and I can't wait to talk about it and discuss some theories I have about it.